We'll now begin the second session on the best practices. For this session, we are joined by the Korean Legislation Research Institute, who will present the presentation and the discussion. First of all, we will invite Jiyeon, the head of External Cooperation and PR team from the Korea Legislation and Research Institute, for her presentation. Please welcome her with a big hand. Good morning. My name is Jiyeon. I will be presenting to you about the legislation exchange and support program of our institute. So I will now begin my presentation. I have 4 major categories in my presentation. So I'll first explain about the Asian Legal Information Network, which is managed by the Korea Legislation Research Institute. And I'll explain about the Kelu Forum, which is a conference of legal experts in Korean law, and also Korean Law Academy is an academy that promotes Korean law in the world, and I'll focus on the legislation consulting provided by our institute. First of all, let me explain about the Asia Legal Information Network. It is called as ALIN. In legislation information and experiences are shared through this network to improve the legal culture and the legal information. So this was launched in 2005. Starting from 2005, our institute has been serving as a secretariat of ALIN, and law schools and legislation institute and legal agencies are the members of our network. For better laws in Asia, we aim to promote a better awareness of the laws. So the various legal information of different countries are shared through our platform. So we want to provide that platform through ALIN. What you are seeing now is the logo of ALIN. And you can see this on our website, and our institute is a secretariat. If you go to our website of the institute, you can find the link on the bottom of the website that will lead you to ALIN. ALIN, as of 2021, consists of 34 member organizations in 18 Asian countries. As you can see on this chart, KLRI is currently the secretariat. By region, there are 5 countries in East Asia, and 7 countries in Southeast Asia, 3 countries in South Asia, and 3 countries in Central Asia and Russia. Each country has about 1 member institute normally, but for China and Korea have a lot more members. For Malaysia, there are 2 institutes that are members. So depending on countries, some countries have more than 1 members. So there are 34 members in 18 countries. Then what kind of jobs does ALIN do? We are the secretariat of this ALIN network, and the representatives of members come together once a year to have a general meeting. Since the establishment in 2005, we have a yearly meeting, a general meeting every year. For the first 2 years, it was right after we established this network as a secretariat, so we held the general meeting in Korea. After that, each member would take a turn to host the general meeting. So Thailand, Japan, Vietnam took the turn. For last year, in 2020, it was supposed to be hosted by Taiwan, and India was supposed to host this year's general meeting this year, and it was decided in Thailand in 2019 general meeting. As you may know, because of the COVID-19 situation, Starting from February 2020, we witnessed a worsening situation due to a pandemic and we couldn't travel abroad. So inevitably, the Secretariat had to organize a small-scale general meeting on site and everyone joined online. So last year and this year, for 2 years, we had to have a hybrid meeting as that. In addition to general meeting, we have some academic projects. So we discuss what kind of academic conferences we can have at Lean. But there are experts coming from 34 members. So to make this more meaningful, we had an international symposium together with the general meeting. So starting from 2005, every year we've had a general meeting, and the day after or the afternoon of the same day we would have academic conference or symposium depending on the current issues. So for instance, in 2020, which was last year, because of COVID-19, the whole world was stopped. So we couldn't really travel to different countries, but the pandemic, the virus, continued to travel to different countries. And as the national borders became meaningless because of the virus, what kind of roles legislation should play? That was the theme of the last year's international conference. For this year, what kind of Asian legislations do we have to respond to the pandemic was the theme of this year's conference. In addition to the conference, another thing that Lean is focusing on is the joint research. Within the network, we have various experts in legislation from 18 different countries. So every year we organize joint research, and at the end of the year, we share the result of the research as publications. In 2021, the theme of the international conference and the joint research was the legislative measures against the pandemic in Asian countries. We had online and offline international conference in Korea, and we invited international speakers. We reviewed the legislative measures against COVID-19 in different countries, so it was a valuable time to review that measures together and learn the lessons and also ask for suggestions for the future plans. In line with the international conference, we held the international joint research starting from January this year. We invited experts from 17 countries. For countries like Philippines or Vietnam, 2 experts joined the research as co-authors. So 20 writers were recruited, or they joined as experts for the joint research. So they established the reports that summarize the situation in each country. And other experts, other 17 experts were also asked to review and inspect the report. And this is also conducted as a research task within our institute. So the research project was reviewed by 3 deliberation committee members and 1 supervisor, and is to be published by KLRI. I believe this research is important because the legislative system and the policies were comprehensively collected and reviewed. And this is probably the only project that has been conducted so far. And I believe this was possible because of a lean network managed by KLRI. Some countries such as Cambodia and Indonesia and in some Southeast Asian countries have a poor language access. So we included these countries, and there are countries that are less influential in the international society, such as the Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan in Central Asia. And the situation in these countries are less known in the international society. The legal systems and policies of these countries to respond to pandemic were investigated comprehensively, and the results were provided to Korea and abroad, so we could create good materials on that. So this is significant because we included all of the countries that were ignored before. Also, by collecting, organizing, and sharing the legal information of those countries, including the policies and legal systems of several Asian countries that have not been introduced to Korea, it can be used for research and response to domestic laws related to the pandemic. The joint research report had the same composition for each country. Initially, because each country has different situations, the legal system and policies of the government were briefly introduced. And the report also provided information on how the legal systems or the policies were like before the pandemic. And just like the legislation on pandemics in Korea, what kind of changes happened in other countries, and what were the impressive parts, and what were effective, and what were less effective. So all of these issues were introduced with the addition of the suggestions for the future. We held the international conference on the same topic. As you can see in the picture, in Korea we had on-site conference joined by international speakers online. So each speaker explained about the report that they made, and we continued discussion on that. And that was about Aline. So I'd like to now talk about Kelu Forum, managed by KLRI. Starting from 2012, the KLRI has been organizing Kelu Forum for Korean law researchers in the US for 8 years. Initially, based on a network centered on Korean law researchers, it aims to promote and encourage research needs and demand in Korean law. And we changed that to Kelu Forum, and we expanded it to Europe, whereas previously we focused on in Korea and the US. In the future, we want to expand it to South America and the Middle East, in addition to Europe. And through the forum, we hope that expand the entire Korean Law Academy project and other legislation exchange and cooperation projects throughout the world. K-Law Forum is meaningful because it facilitates active research exchange between K-Law researchers, and also it is to strengthen the network between different countries. Last year, we invited Korean law scholars in Italy and Germany to see their perspectives on Korean law and Korean constitutions. So we identified the trend and the demand for Korean law research. This year, we invited researchers from Spain and Austria to share opinions on the research and education of Korean law overseas. Because of the COVID-19, the Aline conference could not be held on site. Same for the Korea Law Forum. Before, we would go to the US and organize the conference in the law school in the US, but entering 2020 and this year as well, we had to organize online conference. In 2020, the forum was supposed to be held in Hawaii, and for this year, the Korean Law Center in Irvine was to organize the forum, but we had to organize it in Korea as an online forum, but we continued to organize the forum. But next year, the Korean Study Center in Hawaii University celebrates its 50th anniversary, so we are to jointly organize the forum together at the University of Hawaii. For this year, well, previously, Korea, the US, and Europe would join together at one site on the same day to hold a meeting or a forum. But last year and this year, there was a huge regional differences because the Western, Eastern, Pacific region of the US and Europe also participated in the meeting, as well as the Korean experts. It was difficult to find appropriate time for everybody. We had one session for Europe and one session for the mid and the west of the US and also the East and Pacific region of the US. So we had 3 small-scale meetings. So this is the picture from this year's forum. We had a Europe session in 5 p.m. in Korea with the European scholars. And in the 8 a.m. the next day, we had a session with the Eastern US. We had a session with the Western US and Pacific region on the same day, but in the evening. So I'm going to talk about how we are going to utilize Kelu Forum in 2021. We have to strengthen the Korean law network overseas by establishing a human network with overseas Korean law researchers participating in the forum. A pool of experts in the relevant field can be secured, and this can be used for future international collaborative research by researchers. So we can expand the spectrum of the network by doing so. Also, by establishing a network of scholars who study and educate Korean law at universities in the US and Europe, we can expand to the exchange project with the Korean Law Academy to provide textbooks and lectures as well. So this can be new support project that we are considering. So we can also share the difficulties and issues of studying and educating Korean law abroad in comparison with the foreign laws. Also, we can promote the global vision of the KLRI by promoting the legal exchange and support projects and achievements to overseas Korean law scholars, and share research experience and strengthen the research network as well. So next item is our ambitious project, which is Kelu Academy. It started in 2020, which is the last year. Even before that, even if we didn't have the name of Kelu Academy, we provided Korean law training or education continuously. As you can see in the table, I started it only from 2017, but even before that, sporadically, depending on demand, we provided training on Korean law. As you can see from the table, in 2017, Swiss Institute of Comparative Laws made a visit to Korea, as well as Law School of National University of Mongolia and officials from China Legal Affairs Office. They would visit Korea and then come and visit our institute. They would ask if they could learn about the E-Government Act, Personal Information Protection Act, or any legislative procedures and constitutions of Korea. So there were requests in 2017 and 2018 as well. Nepal and Germany made the same request. Following that, in 2019, we had the same request by legislative experts, public officers, professors, working level officials, or students. They made a continuous demand or request for such trainings or lectures. So in response to those requests, we would provide lectures. So we would invite experts or the lecturers or professors on an ad hoc basis. So as we did that, as we were doing that, we wanted to create a more systematic program to provide a training or lectures on Korean law. So we formed a Korea Law Academy in 2020. The initial thought we had was that we would need a textbook. So we made a textbook, and with the textbook, we first formed the working level group who could work on the textbook. So we invited experts to form a working group, and we had a working group meeting last year, and with them we continued to develop curriculum and discussed on the textbook. As you can see, we had starting from the competition law, labor law, public health law, e-government law, all these textbooks were created on different laws. So the development was completed last year. The titles of the textbook or lectures were based on the requests that were made on a training of Korean law in the past. For competition law, there is a high interest in Korean law of Korea within the Asian countries because we are leading country when it comes to competition law. So we set this as a title and textbook of the lectures. After we experienced the COVID-19 last year, we arose as the leading country when it comes to the quarantine and anti-COVID measures, and there is a high interest in the public health law, so we included public health law in the academy as well. E-government law is also drawing a lot of attention, so we included that as well. So a lot of subjects were selected in the curriculum for the curriculum. So in addition to just making the textbooks, we had a lot of requests from overseas universities for lectures, and we would make a visit to those countries, and we would offer 1 week long special lectures. We couldn't do that anymore. So last year for universities in Philippines and Indonesia, we provided online lectures. For this year, this is the second year of the Kelu Academy, so we added one more subject to the curriculum, so we provide 8 subjects in total. So we formed a different working group consisting of experts. So utilizing their expertise, we've created the curriculum. As we were developing the curriculum, especially in the special situation due to the pandemic, we wanted to promote and inform the online curriculum and online lectures as well. So online media was utilized for the materials and textbooks. So it's like teaser or trailers of the movie. So before joining the lectures, we would promote what kind of details would be included in the lectures. So if you're interested, how about consulting with us for the opening of the lectures? So that was the major details of the online contents that we created based on the textbook we developed last year. So on the official YouTube account of KLRI, we would have a separate channel on Kelu Academy. So the textbook that we published last year and that to be published this year and the online content are all utilized together for the courses. The Kazakhstan legal experts at Kazakhstan Legislative and Legal Information Research Institute have already made a request for our constitution and the lectures on the constitution. So we are currently discussing with that. So what is our plan in the future? We focused on the lectures provided by the Asia Legal Information Network. We are currently discussing with various institutions in different countries. We are currently discussing on how to open up a series of lectures. By utilizing Career Forum Network, we will expand the education to the US and Europe. As of now, we have only one textbook for various topics. We are considering differentiating the different levels of the textbook, so that's our ambition. In the mid to long-term plan, and this is also the slide that I shared last year, after the first 1 or 2 years, the next year is the second term. So we will establish regular lectures on Korean law at overseas universities, and legislative support and public official training program would be the plan for the next year. And in the longer term, we want to become the main platform for Korean law education. Lastly, the institute is performing legislation consulting. The resident legislation system in Laos was also the project that we provided consulting for, along with the World Bank. And even after that, we cooperated with the international organizations and other institutes in different countries to provide legislation consulting. In October this year, the legal and police experts visited our institute from Germany to get advice on the legislation on autonomous driving. So, regarding the smart mobility, we have an experts who are the head of the Regulatory and Legislation Research Center and researchers on the autonomous vehicle and smart mobility legislation. So we had a discussion on legislation and also about the German legal provisions. So we actually learned from that meeting, and we provided advice on legislation of German laws. So this was a truly meaningful meeting we had. And also there is a center on integrated rural development for Asia and the Pacific. This was actually established by UN in 1979, and our institute signed an MOU with this center and joined as a member of the technical committee in 2017. So we have revamped the sub laws of this organization, and the various laws and rules are to be revamped by our institute as well. So that was the presentation on 4 different topics. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much for excellent presentation. Please give her a big round of applause. We will now have a discussion. The discussion will join by Deputy Director Heejin from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Please welcome her with a big round of applause as well. We'll have a discussion on the presentation. The floor is now yours. Hello. My name is Heejin from the International Economic Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I'm joining this session as a discussant. Thank you very much for your presentation on the project at the Institute. I believe the key of the Institute project is to build the capacity of the Institute and also the international cooperation on the advising the legislation. Overall, the project is very comprehensive and it has the good foundation of the institute. So there are 4 major projects that were presented by the researchers. I'd like to make a brief discussion on that. First of all, a LIM project was presented. Due to the pandemic, was actually hit directly. The on-site discussion and face-to-face meeting were important for this network and this project. Still, because of the pandemic, the pre-planned project had to be nullified and cancelled. And despite all the difficulties, a hybrid conference was organized, and also the theme of the discussion was about the legislation against the pandemic. So this was timely and highly relevant. And secondly, Kelu Forum. In the past, KLO Forum focused on the experts in the US and Korea, so it would select one theme every year. But because it was held online last year and this year, many different countries could also join. Last year, European countries, and the US, different states in US joined. So it held 3 different sessions, which is highly appropriate. Also, KLO Forum has secured a pool of experts so that it could be utilized for future international cooperation. So the detailed sector can have more relevance with each other, I believe. It can select a granted theme and select sub-themes to form the section themes to have more continuity and have more focus. Last year, Kelu Academy, by utilizing online lecture platform, it distributes and creates videos, so it has a better accessibility of the content. But when it comes to the selection of the speakers and the lectures, I believe it was highly time and energy consuming, and I expect to have high quality lectures. The Kelu Academy is quite good achievements. Before, it focused on high level of visuals, and now the junior scholars can participate in the process. I believe they have a high growth potential as the experts in the future, so I believe it has a huge growth potential as a network. Also, the training on the Korean law can be continued. For each country, the researchers and high-level officials were the targets of the capacity building project, and I believe that was the main project of the legislation cooperation and exchange. I believe that each working level officials in each countries in legislation field were the main targets, and significance and the values of the legislation cooperation exchange program can continue through these training programs. Also, the Korea Foreign Affairs Academy is also inviting high-level officials and experts to organize a forum, and I believe that the institute can benchmark from this case. Also, we can see the YouTube as the platform that is being utilized. There is a Microsoft program that we use, and if you use this program, speakers and discussants and also the public can participate in the forum to raise questions to speakers, so it allows various ways of participation, so you can utilize this as well. The theme of today is the role of Korea in international cooperation amid the COVID-19 crisis. So what kind of research project can we perform in this crisis, and what are the areas with increasing demand for research? First of all, the mobilization between the countries. As you discussed on the different legislation, different countries against the pandemic, you had a research and a study on a different legislation in different countries. And internationally, there are issues that are continually discussed against the pandemic, so you can discover these issues and discuss on that as well. After COVID-19, many countries are focused on the safe movement across different borders. So this would be the continued topic of discussion. So this is directly related to the safety of a country. So resumption of the movement across borders and vaccines would be the main focus of discussions. But because there are issues of privacy and the safety of individuals, and especially by utilizing blockchains, internationally accepted and mutually recognized vaccine certificates should be introduced, and there is a continuous discussion on that as well. So mutual recognition of vaccination and the vaccine passport and vaccine certificates and relevant information on privacy information are continuously being discussed. So measures and relevant legislation and policies and how those policies and legislation should be introduced would be a good research item for next year. Second issue that I'll talk about is crisis management and the legislation for public health. Pandemic has restrained free movements and economic activities. So when it comes to public health crisis, the developing countries are more fragile and they are hit harder and they have difficulties because they cannot respond quickly. So to resolve these issues in the longer term, international cooperation is necessary. The legislation consulting project is different from the previous project because it's a longer term project, and the crisis management system and public health system in Korea could help developing countries to prevent additional infectious diseases and to improve their public health system. So this could be a topic of discussion and the theme of the research. Next is digital transformation. The research institute currently focuses on the Asian countries as a major countries of cooperation, but I believe that Asia countries recognize the ICT technology as the major driving force for their development. So digital transformation is a major national agenda for the next 10 years of development. So the fintech and other digitalization is being accelerated in these countries, but there is a huge technological gap among Asian countries, or there is no law or systems to guarantee data sovereignty. So discussion on this should be made in a timely manner. And I believe that this is the right time for that. Lastly, I believe that it is quite difficult now to pursue international cooperation because of the pandemic, but it has continuously discovered new projects and pioneered new areas of cooperation. So I look forward to continuous development of your institute. Thank you very much. You made a very positive feedbacks on assessment of our projects. I believe the same for all other institutes, but the legislation project was actually hit hard by the COVID-19. We had to go abroad and meet experts and overseas to form and strengthen our network. That was the basis of our projects. But because all of that were completely blocked, we had to continue our project despite the difficulties. So that was the biggest challenge for us. Despite the difficulty, we did our best to continue our projects, and I explained about that in our presentations, and I am grateful that you gave us good feedback based on that. You also mentioned about the issues that we've always considered or thought about before. So based on your feedback, we will make improvement for the next year's project. Especially, you mentioned about the International Law Academy performed by the Korean Diplomacy Academy. And we didn't actually consider about that, but we will look into the ways for cooperation with the academy in the future. You also gave me 3 major items, such as the cross-border movement and vaccine pass or vaccine passports. These are the issues that are being discussed a lot in Korea. In Europe, the vaccine pass is actually a hot topic of discussion already. The Korean legal circle is now just starting discussion or research on vaccine pass and its legal implications and possible policies. We are cooperating mainly with Asian countries, so how can we utilize this vaccine pass? I believe that would be an important and timely topic of discussion for us, especially for Southeast Asian countries that focus mainly on the tourism sector. Actually, those countries experienced a lot of damages in terms of their competitiveness of the country. So a kind of policy support can be made to facilitate cross-border movements. So if we can continue discussion on that issue, then all the legal scholars and experts can be provided with some good advice. So thank you very much for suggesting that idea. Lastly, you mentioned about the digital transformation. This is also the area that we are always considering as a topic of discussion. In Asian region, for instance, the ALIN has been well established by our institute, so we can look up all the legal information on one network, and it is so easy to find that information. But there are not many, hardly any information, hardly any country that has the same network. Thailand or Mongolia are actually asking for our advice to establish similar networks, and they are in the initial stage of the projects. Even if there is a will of the government, there should be an infrastructure that supports that will to realize that fully. So it depends on the development of the ICT industry within the region. So that would determine the level of the implementation of the project. So the ICT industry should develop together with the legislation, and this is something that other sectors or other countries are making efforts. So to keep up with the development of ICT industry, our legislation institute will make a continuous effort. Thank you very much for a good comment. Do you have any additional comments that you would like to add? If not, let's conclude the discussion here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for sharing good opinions. So please give them a big hand for their efforts. This concludes the second session of the best practice of a global Korea convention. We will resume the next session at 2 p.m. Enjoy your lunch, and I'll see you again at 2 p.m.